Hey guys, I hope you're doing good. I'm glad you're here watching this video. This is the 5th Rocky Creek Youth Ministry Quarantine Bible Study, where we are talking about drawing near to God and growing in our relationship with God and just spending this extra time that we suddenly have a little more wisely and making sure that we are giving God time in our lives daily. These are really kind of crazy times right now. We need to remember that this ain't no daggum travel ball. If you get that, awesome. If not, that's okay. But these really are kind of crazy times we're living in. People are kind of acting crazy too, right? People are going to the stores and buying all the groceries they can find. People are going and buying all the toilet paper that they can get their hands on, and now stores aren't even really allowing people to buy the toilet paper. Only a very limited amount are people able to buy at one time. And so people are really kind of going crazy. People are sort of acting like it's the end of the world a little bit. And so there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And now I haven't really personally seen anything too crazy happen, but I did see something kind of funny. It made me laugh when I was at Walmart a few days ago. And that was this guy was wearing gloves. You know, he had his rubber gloves on, and he grabbed a couple bags of chips and put them in his buggy. And then he starts scratching his face and kind of rubbing on his face. And then he picks up his daughter and puts her in the buggy. And then he grabs a couple more bags of chips and puts it in the buggy. And then he continues to push the buggy, all while wearing the same gloves, not sanitizing them or changing them out or anything. And so it's really no different than if he was just using his bare hands. And so that was pretty funny to me. It was just weird. Don't know why he was wearing the gloves. But comment below if you have a chance to just share maybe the funniest or the craziest thing that you've seen since all this coronavirus started and this quarantine began. But people really are just kind of acting crazy. People are acting like it's the end of the world. And ironically enough, the verse that we are talking about, that I'm going to be talking about today, it starts out like this: the end of all things is at hand. Now, it's not talking about the virus. It's not really talking about the quarantine or anything like that. Of course, what it's talking about is that we are living in the time period between Jesus's death and resurrection and his return. And so the next big move that God's going to make on the world and the earth is Jesus returning. And so that's kind of the next big thing that we are looking towards, that we are looking forward to. Now, back in the Old Testament, they were looking for Jesus, his first time here on earth. And that was the big thing they were looking forward to. But of course, we're looking forward to his second coming. And so that's all it's really referring to. And even though it's talking about kind of that judgment day coming and what we're looking towards, in the context of today, it really does have some wise words in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 11. But really, it's wisdom shared that we need to be listening to every day of our lives, no matter what's going on in the world. So listen to the first part of these verses. Again, we're going to be talking about 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 11 for the next few videos, but today we're just going to talk about just the first part of one verse, and it says, "The end of all things is at hand, therefore be self-controlled." How bad do we need self-control right now? I don't know how you're doing with all of this, but there's a lot of people who are dealing with this quarantine differently, and some good, some not so good. Again, people are kind of going crazy and acting like it's the end of the world, but we have to be practicing self-control, right? When it comes to maybe getting out, going shopping, hanging out with friends or family, we have to have self-control and stay at home. Even when we do make it out to the stores or whatever, we have to practice self-control, that we're not buying everything that we can get our hands on, right? We have to trust it in God in that, but we really have to show self-control. We need self-control with spiritual things, of course. We need self-control when it comes to staying away and resisting sin. We need self-control when it comes to actually carving out time during our day for God, so that we have time, making sure we have time with God. It takes self-control to make sure that we are reading the Bible every single day. It takes self-control to make sure that we're getting outside and getting fresh air and getting some exercise. All of this takes self-control. But even with all of this free time that you suddenly have, do you still find it maybe a little difficult to make time for God? I know I have, and I've been trying to practice what I preach in these videos, but it can be difficult. We get busy, we get to doing things, or maybe you're just being lazy. But we tend to maybe still struggle with making sure that we have enough time with God. See, this is a problem of self-control. There's a video that's been going around for a couple weeks now. Maybe you've seen it, but it is of a healthcare official. And you know, she's up there, she's got the podium and all the microphones sticking in her face, and she's reading her documents, and she's being serious and stern about it. And she says, you know, we can't be, we need to make sure that we are not touching our faces. It is very important to prevent the spread of this virus that we are not touching our faces, especially our nose and our mouths. And then she proceeds to turn the page, but what does she do? She licks her finger to turn the page. And it was so funny. It's so funny to see that, her warn everybody and kind of telling everyone not to touch their mouths, and then there she is licking her fingers. And if you go on YouTube or anywhere else, you'll see a lot of these where people are you know, government officials or health officials are urging people not to be touching their faces and then other things, and then they're wiping their faces, they're wiping their noses, and then they're touching papers and microphones and shaking hands and all this other stuff. And that's, they're struggling with self-control there. Even though they understand what they're saying, not to touch the face, they're just struggling following through with it. It can be difficult to practice self-control. Let's see if you can, for the rest of this video, I'm going to challenge you to not touch your face from this point on. And if you do, kind of keep count of how much you touch your face, and maybe you can keep count of how much I touch my face from now to the end of the video, and let me know how many times you actually end up touching your face before the video is over with. But we need to make sure that we're practicing self-control. But I mean, again, it's easier said than done. We can talk about it over and over again and say it over and over again. I have to be self-control. I have to resist and stay away from sin. I have to make sure I have time to draw near to God and grow in my relationship with Him. But it's just not that easy sometimes. So I'm going to share with you some practical tips that hopefully can help you practice self-control. One of the first things that we can do is we need to think of the future. We need to think of what the consequences could be of our actions. That will encourage us to do good things. That will encourage us to think, hey, if I do this good thing, hey, I might get this reward, or you know, my parents might reward me in a certain way, or even, hey, if I do this thing, God is watching. He is paying attention to what I'm doing, and so that is going to help me in my relationship with Him. That is going to help me get to heaven, but it's also going to help us stay away from bad things, right? I might get in trouble from my parents, I might get grounded, or of course, God might not like that, and it might distance myself from God. That could be a sin that's separating me from God. And so we need to think about the future. We need to think about the consequences of the actions that we're doing and the words that we're saying. It's like I said in the first video in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it says, set your mind on things above. We need to set our minds on things above, on heavenly things. So when we're making decisions, we are doing so like a Christian should, and thinking like a Christian should. Other versions of the Bible, like the New American Standard Bible or the NASB, it says, instead of saying self-control, it says to have sound judgment. We have to have sound judgment. And again, we need to determine what is in the best interest of our relationship with God. Another thing that maybe you can do is set reminders on your phone. That's something that I'm going to start doing. I have haven't done a great job with leading my family every single day in Bible study time and prayer time. And so from now on, every morning at 9 a.m., I'm setting my alarm so we're all up and usually in the living room, just kind of getting the day started at that point. We're all going to sit down and study God's Word, memorize some verses. We actually started doing that today. We're going to start praying more together. And again, I'm having to set a reminder for myself so I don't lose track of time and so I don't just get busy doing other things. And so that's always a good thing to try and do. We need to set up just other reminders. It doesn't have to be on your phone. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4, it's known as the Shema. And this Shema, it was kind of the ultimate law, the ultimate commandment from God to his people. Kind of like when someone asked Jesus, what's the most important command? He says to love God and to love others. Well, here in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, he kind of says a similar thing here. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart." See, these are things that this was a command that they were to study and put to memory. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your might. But he doesn't stop with just writing it on your heart, aka kind of like memorizing it so it's always there. But he says, you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. God's telling them to make reminders for themselves, to write it on their walls and on their doorposts, write it on their hands if they have to, do whatever it takes to remember this command from God to love him with all that you have. We need to be doing the same thing, and it doesn't have to be that verse. He even says the same thing in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 18 through 20. He encourages the Israelites to do the same thing again, to set themselves reminders. And again, it doesn't have to be those verses, but just Bible verses that maybe you find inspirational, that's going to help you draw near to God, and you can have fun with it. You can draw a picture or paint a picture. There are different things that you can do with that, but that's another way to help us have self-control throughout the day. Peter continues in this verse in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 7. He continues and he says, we must also be sober-minded. So we have to be have self-control, or we have to be sober-minded. Are we thinking clearly? Are we seeing the world through a Christian lens, or has the world blinded us? Are we aware of what's going on around us and how God is working in our lives? Are we restraining our worldly impulses? To draw near to God, we must practice self-control. We must practice have sound judgment, and we must have a sober mind. Today, I've talked about a few reasons to have self-control and a sober mind, as well as some ways to help us practice these things. Next week, we will discuss Peter's reasons behind saying why we need self-control, why we need to have a sober mind. But hopefully you can take some of these tips. You can set yourself some reminders, and that will hopefully encourage yourself to have self-control and to have a sober mind where we're doing the things that we should, where we're staying away from the things that we shouldn't be doing, and we're thinking clearly as a Christian should think. Again, I miss y'all. I'm glad that you've watched this video. I hope that you find it helpful. I hope that you find it encouraging. And I hope to see y'all soon.